Hello and good day to everyone. If it's evening, night, morning, afternoon, I don't know yet, but welcome to this new virtual DDD meetup. Today we have Henning and Stefan talking about what writing a book taught us about collaborative modeling. And for those who are joining in on Zoom, please join Miro. The link is in the chat. You can keep chatting to us. And for the people who are on Zoom, also use the chat and keep sending this messages. And welcome, Henning and Stefan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. Nice to be here again. My last time was, I can't remember, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I'm not sure.
Yeah, something like that. Been a while.
Okay, so hi there from me too.
Okay, then let's get started. I see people are still coming in, but we don't want to keep you waiting. So, surprise, Henning and I have written a book last year. And usually we talk about the book, about the method that we describe in the book. And yes, we will talk a little bit about it, but for today, we picked something else. We thought there are a couple of things in there that do not only apply to domain storytelling, the technique that we wrote about, but they are applicable to other collaborative modeling techniques as well. And our idea is that first we will present you our ideas, have a short presentation, even do a little demo together, and then we will open up the discussion, and we're curious to learn how you view those things that we're going to describe to you. So, but first, who is us? So, I'm Stefan. I'm from Austria originally, but I've been living in Hamburg for more than 16 years now. And I'm originally a software developer, but in the last couple of years, my focus has been on business process modeling, collaborative modeling, requirements engineering. So I help teams develop business software. And for all of my professional life, actually, Henning has been my co-worker. So Henning, who are you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Henning. I'm the guy with the many kids, and I'm very much looking forward to our evening.
Okay, we've been part of the DDD community for some years now, and I believe it was 2018. We were in Amsterdam, had a great talk at Domain-Driven Design Europe, and on the airport on the way back, Henning said, you know, Stefan, we should write a book about this whole thing called domain storytelling. And yeah, we said, yeah, let's do it. And then, well, it was 3 years of hard work. But last year, finally, we released our book, Domain Storytelling, a collaborative, visual, and agile way to build domain-driven software. Now, writing a book is hard, as it turns out. And one of the toughest things for us was taking what we've done in workshops, in trainings, in consulting, and trying to find the right words for that, making it understandable and turn it into actionable advice. And I'm sure there are several things, or I hope there are several things in the book that are applicable not just for domain storytelling, but for several collaborative modeling techniques. But two of those things we want to talk about today. One is scope, and the other one is scenario-based modeling. So if you're not familiar yet with the term collaborative modeling, or COMO for short, what is that? That is a family of modeling methods that are collaborative in a sense that they bring together the people with the questions and the people with the answers. So usually that's development teams and our domain experts, product owners, or future users of software or current users of software. And those techniques, they have a wide range of use cases, from understanding a domain, getting familiar with maybe a new client, a new customer of yours, but also talking about requirements, deriving requirements, finding boundaries, bounded contexts, as we call them in domain-driven design, right down to the implementation level, finding implementable domain models. So a big family of techniques then that can also be combined. So the most prominent example is probably event storming, but domain storytelling also belongs in those techniques. Some of them come from the domain-driven design world, like event storming. Others come from the agile or product world, like user story mapping. Others come from the behavior-driven development world, like example mapping. But they all fit together nicely, I think. So let's look at how we defined, or what brought us to these terms of scope and scenario-based modeling. So in domain storytelling, we do something that for a lot of people is new or maybe even strange. Instead of looking at a business process like this, like a flow of decisions, we do something else. So we do not look at everything that could possibly happen. Instead, we learn from concrete examples, so from things that actually happen, so from scenarios or stories. So this is the first major point that we had to find the words to describe. This is what we call scenario-based modeling. So usually for one business process, we look at several scenarios, several stories, and every model is just about one concrete story, one concrete example. So how does it look like? And this is where the different methods have different answers. So in domain storytelling, we use a pictographic language. That means we use little icons and arrows and text. And here you can see an example from our book. It is about car leasing, auto leasing. Hence, you see little cars and stick figures, and you see a speech bubble for verbal communication. You see little document icons for contracts and so on. And this pictographic language, we use it to describe the story that our domain experts tell us. So in this case, we have a customer who chooses a car from a catalog, and then we read the second arrow. The customer asks for an offer. Who does he ask or she ask? The salesperson. And then the salesperson offers a contract for the car with a monthly installment to the customer, and so on. So in this version of scenario-based modeling, this is very much centered around the actors, about the people or the software systems that are active in the story. So the idea is that this pictographic language shows us who does what, with what work objects, and why do they do it. This example here is very coarse-grained. It's a coarse-grained overview of a customer-facing business process from choosing a car to all the way up here in the top right corner, returning the car after the leasing period. So this little picture here actually covers several years. This is, of course, not the only way to use domain stories. We can also dive deeper. So, for example, going back in the bottom right corner, you see a risk manager doing some stuff. And if we zoom in, we can look more closely at the work of a risk manager, and suddenly software systems start to appear, and we can talk about what are the tasks or the purposes of individual software systems, how do those systems work together, where are manual tasks involved, and so on. So this is another thing that many of these techniques, of these collaborative modeling techniques, have in common. They have a very wide range of use cases. So depending on the purpose that you want to fulfill, you can create an overview of your domain, you can go into the details, you can talk about things in general, you can talk about very detailed things, how software is used, and so on. And this is what we call the scope of a domain story, or in a broader sense, the scope of collaborative modeling workshop. So these are the two things that we want to talk about with you. And since we like to learn from examples, we thought it's best to do a little example together and then use this example to illustrate our thoughts about scenario-based modeling and the scope of models. And this is where Henning will take over.
Okay. And that means first I'm going to try to share my screen. And I hope you are seeing a browser window of mine now with a tool that's called egan.io. That's a modeling tool especially built for domain stories. As you can see here, that's open source. So if you find bugs, please fix them and submit a PR. And I'm going to click on use online, so then we can just use it here in the browser window. And I want to model with the group that we have here a typical process that we probably all know, or that we used to know, and that is to travel by train from a city A to a city B, for example, from Hamburg, Stefan and mine hometown, to Amsterdam, where Kenny lives, or other cities here. And I think for most of us, it has been a bit of a time that we last traveled by train, but hopefully you still remember how that used to work out. So please open up your mics and tell me your story. Tell me the story of how we traveled from city A to city B, from Hamburg to Amsterdam, for example. And I will also try to have a look at the chat in YouTube, because there we don't have mics. So, yeah.
So is it from, for my, would it be before even traveling by train and getting a ticket, or reserving it online? Or?
Yeah, those are all interesting questions, right? So I hear there are these possibilities. Let's start with the typical case that is happening here. The 80% case, the happy path. Those are interesting things. So I would say standard case here. So Matthias, I think you also wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'd probably start with buying a ticket.
Okay, you would start with buying a ticket. So I put ticket here and buys. And then there's the question, who are you? What's your role in this?
I'd say I'm a traveler.
Okay, so you are.
Oh, I wanted to say that as well. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's good. So we have kind of agreement here.
But I wouldn't instantly buy a ticket. I would first look into options.
Ah, interesting. Where would you look those options up in?
Schedules, time schedules, right, online. So I would go to the website and check for, well, what are my options? Because you probably, well, yesterday I checked for going to London, right? Actually to Edinburgh, somewhere in July. And the first thing I will do is, okay, I want to go on a Saturday, and I want to see, okay, which options do I have? How long do they take, right? Are they direct or not direct? Are the times matching? All these. So I want to first look at options.
Okay, and you said in the timetable, right? That was your word?
No, on the website, I will look for options, right? I will just say, well, I go from Hamburg to Amsterdam on a Saturday, and just give me your options in the morning or something. Okay,
website. Honestly, that sounds technical to me.
Yeah.
And while we look it up, so let's make.
Would you do it different, Matthias?
Let's make a thought experiment. Let's make a thought experiment and stay in the old days, in the paper days. How did we do it in the old days? And how can we still do it today? So if there is no website, where would we look up the options? And I'm going to tell you later, Stefan and I are going to tell you later why we are doing this thought experiment. This might make sense.
I think I heard you say timetable before. So my guess is
that's
look it up
my
in
word
timetable.
Well, if I want to go now, I'll go to the station. I'll ask a assistant customer, the person at the desk. I need to go to Amsterdam. What are my options?
Okay.
Or I will call them, I guess, which might also be technical, but
Yeah.
at least I will ask a desk person.
Okay.
What are my options going from Amsterdam or going from Hamburg and Amsterdam on a specific day?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So we see we can ask for option that person at the desk, and we also see that there are different possibilities here. So I'm going to write that down here. Matthias, you said there's this variant of looking it up in the timetable. Variant.
Sure.
So we have someone in the YouTube chat saying they're from Australia and they have a climate ticket and they can travel whenever and wherever they can. So
okay, so that's another variant. Awesome. I'm not sure if that Australian climate ticket, Austrian climate ticket will work traveling from Germany.
Australia in this thing. Austria, yeah.
Austria.
Yeah, Austria.
If this works, traveling from Germany to Amsterdam, but that's a good variant. I'm going to add that here. So look it up in the timetable is one variant, and another one is climate ticket.
Yeah, and in the Netherlands we have a chip, so an RFID tag, which we can use to travel.
Okay.
But yeah, that won't be useful in Germany.
Okay, so the traveler asks for options, the person at the desk, and then the traveler buys a ticket. Is that also from the person at the desk, or who do they buy it from?
Mostly a ticket machine, I think. Mostly it's not the same person you would ask that question to and buy the ticket from, I think.
Well, in this case, yeah. So if you're traveling in the Netherlands itself, you would just buy a ticket at the machine. But I think if it's an international travel, then you need to go. Then that person will buy the tickets for you because it's probably an international one. And then, as far as my experience goes.
Okay, so it is the same person here, or it's another one?
No, in this case, I think it's the same because it's international. If you're only going national, then no.
Okay, so then we will put another variant here. Variant okay, and so the person at the desk. Yes, it is a person at the desk talking about domain language. What would be the right name for that person at the desk? That's a hard one because apparently we're missing the most important thing in DDD, the domain expert, right? For that one. Yeah. Do we have a name for that, or do we stay with the person at the desk? For the time, let's stay for a person at the desk.
Yeah,
so,
I haven't spoken to this person in a long time.
So the traveler has bought the ticket from the person at the desk, and then what happens next? Sorry.
Depending on where you travel, but in the Netherlands you need to go through gates, so you need to check in.
Mm-hmm. And you do that with your ticket?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure internationally if that also works, but probably.
Yeah, depends, but on your ticket, there's always a barcode that you can scan on these. So some train station block your entry and some don't. Like if you go to Schiphol, you can just go to the to the train, but in other parts you can't. So, but at least you need to check in.
Okay, so checks in with ticket at gate, right? And then the traveler has checked in. What happens next?
Waiting, probably.
And okay, do we want to model it? waiting.
You get a notification that the train is running late. That's no.
So after that, probably boarding the train, I guess.
Okay, yeah, we said we go for the standard case, so that's why we get this notification.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Yeah,
Matthias, it's good that you say boarding the train, because usually when we're doing the first thing, then it's also interesting to look at the happy path, because we want to know what we are doing this stuff for, not what can possibly go wrong. We are going to look at that later. So the traveler boards the train. And then?
Well, the train leaves the station, preferably.
Yeah, okay. Who makes the train leave the station?
I don't know the English name.
Let's say the Dutch name.
machinist.
Machinist, right? Yeah.
Maybe there's a machinist in English as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that the same in German, the word?
There is a machinist, but that's more somebody who's working with other machines. We would call it Lokomotivführer. Okay, so the machinist, what does he do with the train? He drives it, or what did you say? Drives train out of the station, right? Drives train out of the station with the traveler. And then what happens next?
You disembark the train, I guess.
Okay. And disembark. And then?
Leave the station.
And then?
Someone says browse social media during the trip. So. Stay on TikTok all day. No.
Yeah, why aren't why Kenny, why are we on YouTube? Why aren't we on TikTok?
Yeah,
honestly.
I don't know.
Okay, browse social media. Do I have a good icon for that?
And especially not connect to the Wi-Fi on the train, because your current phone connection is a lot faster.
And we're traveling in Germany, right? There's the Wi-Fi is seldom working there. Okay, so I put a note here with variant Wi-Fi.
So from what I remember, we probably need to have a jump trains, or not literally jump, but
okay. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Looking at the time, I would say we assume there's a standard, there's a direct connection.
Okay. Yeah.
Assumption, direct connection. but it's very good that you mentioned it, and I will add another note here for us that we have to jump trains. And I see from Faith in the chat, she says engineer.
Yeah.
The right word here for the machine.
Google said it translates to either driver or engineer in English. So the word machinist.
Okay, I put all the words in here. So it's an international meetup, right? Machinist and the German word as well. Lokomotivführer. That's the long word. You can shorten locomotive of log.
Only if you're a developer, right?
Only if you're a developer. No, that's actually the real word thing. And Vasum asked the question, is there nobody on the train to check the tickets? I think that's pointing us to a difference here. So Matthias and Kenny, you said there's this check-in with a ticket at the gate, and Vasum is in Austria, and here in Germany as well. There will be some guy on the train checking the track. That's not the case in the Netherlands, right?
Yes, it can be. So
okay.
Because some gates are not locked in some areas, right? Like if you board on Schiphol Airport, there are no gates. You can just go to the train instantly, but you can't check in. So there's always a random check.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Not a random. Each train has a conductor. Conductor, is that the English name then?
Okay, David, you look like you're a native English speaker. What would be what would be the right name for that?
Conductor.
Conductor. That translates a bit better. Hi, David.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. So the conductor checks the ticket of the traveler, right? And that would also be the case in the US, right? So it's kind of a national process, but most of the things happen everywhere. Okay, so is that it from a coarse-grained perspective, from a bird's eye perspective? I'm going to step through the process and give that a try. So we have the
only if you go back, you have disembark at 6, and the check of the conductor is before, so after the thing drives, so it should be 6.
Okay, so this should be 6?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Then it makes sense.
Okay, so then we have the traveler who asks for options, the person at the desk, and there are variants, and the traveler also can look up the timetable or can have a climate ticket if he's Austrian. Then the traveler buys a ticket from the person at the desk and then checks in with that ticket at the gate. Sorry, the traveler boards the train. Then the engineer or machinist or Lokführer drives the train out of the station with the traveler. The conductor checks the ticket of the traveler. The traveler disembarks the train and then leaves the station. And then the traveler browses social media. I think here's something with numbering wrong, right? This should be 7 as well. David, now that you're here, what's the name of the person at the desk here? We were unsure.
Oh, I'll think about it and get back to you. I'm not a big public transport rider, being in Los Angeles.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure if I would know it. What would be the German word for that? So, okay. So
maybe clerk?
Clerk. Okay. Let's go with clerk, that we have a nice domain word here. Okay, so this is it from a bird's eye perspective. So In domain storytelling, we call this a coarse-grained story, because we're not looking on all the details. We're looking on the from the mountaintop up to the bottom. Okay, Faith also says another word for clerk could be ticket agent or customer service agent. Okay.
Yeah, you can take off clerk. That's good.
Okay. And we stay with ticket agent. Awesome. So now we have this coarse-grained story, and coarse-grained stories, they are, for example, well suited to find context boundaries. And I don't think we have the time to do this to look into this, how we would do this in real life here, finding context for this. But I would say at least one context I see here, and that is this purchase of the ticket. Maybe that's step 1 and 2, or maybe that's only just step 2. We would have to discuss that. So I would say this is a bounded context, ticket purchase or ticket purchasing. So that's the activity that's done here. And that's, I would say, obviously something else from ticket check, which would be step number 6 here, for example.
Yeah, and also step number 3.
That should also be part of this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What you can see here is what's often happening when we start to draw boundaries into a domain story, then the picture changes. We have to move stuff around.
Yeah.
And that's typical. And sometimes we have to do things with a tool here so that things look nice. Won't go into detail here. So we have at least 2 contexts here. Usually I would say, okay, let's look at the other steps as well. Let's find context for them as well. But since we all want to finish this in reasonable time, let's start with these 2 things here. So as I said, we have a coarse-grained domain story here. And as Stefan said, usually in a domain storytelling session, we are going to tell not just one story, but several stories. One reason for that is this scenario-based setting. So we're starting with, we're doing the standard case in the paper days, the happy path, assuming there's a direct connection. Next step could be to say, oh, let's start a new story and say, well, here we did travel by train from A to B, direct connection. And then our next story will be travel from A to B with switching trains. And then we would tell another story and look into the details. Switching trains. Look at what's different here. We could start from scratch here, or we could take a copy of this picture. It depends on what might make sense. So then we would stay on the same level. It would also be coarse-grained. Another possibility would be to go from here, not into the right direction, stay on the same level of granularity, but go more fine-grained. So for example, we could say, well, let's look at this ticket purchase. Well, we have only 2 steps here, and look at the sub-steps that are happening there. This buy the ticket, what's happening behind that? There is probably the ticket agent wants to know what's the connection, what is the station that we are starting, what's this station we have as a destination. Then the ticket agent will offer some special tickets like the climate ticket and blah, blah, blah. And all this, we don't put this into this picture that we have here, which should stay on a coarse-grained level, but we would also put this on another domain story here. So we would then say ticket purchase, find rent. That would be another step that we are going here. Okay, Stefan, and I think with that, I'm handing over to you again. I'm going to export this picture here. There's this button here, export image, and then I'm going to put it on the Miro board so you can look at that afterwards.
And for all those who have joined before we shared the link, here it is again in the Zoom chat. And I will take over your screen. If you allow me to take it over, Henning.
Sorry, no, you should.
Yeah. Okay. So it will appear shortly here. And now that you've seen an example, let's discuss what to do with that. So what Henning did was he modeled a scenario or a story. So what are scenarios? And we use the term scenarios and story interchangeably in our book and also in our presentation today. So we like to use this definition by John Carroll that you see here. So scenarios are stories about people and their activities. So you saw the people like the traveler and the activities, so what they do, and they take place in a fixed context. And typically the actors, they have goals. So they are working towards something, want to achieve something. And the scenario has a plot that consists of a series of activities or events that make up the story. So I've shown this picture on the left before. So a scenario is something very different from traditional workflow modeling, where you focus on those well, here it's a BPMN diagram, so here they're called gateways. In other languages, they have different names, but looking at a scenario is very different from looking at a process model that shows you possibilities of things that could happen. So that's a very big difference. And of course, the idea or the important point here is how do we find those scenarios and which ones are the important ones? So I took a couple of notes here of things that came up during our modeling session. So, for example, Kenny said he wants to go on a Saturday in July versus I want to go now. So those could be two different scenarios for the same process of traveling by train. Then we discussed, do we have a national, do we travel nationally or do we travel internationally? And then there's this Klima ticket in Austria, and in Netherlands, there's another specialty. You have to go through the gates and check in, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you can see there's actually a billion of possibilities. And all those things are actually relevant if you want to develop software for European railway systems. So if you develop software, you have to deal with this complexity, and scenarios are a good way to actually learn about this complexity and make it tangible and do something with it. Another typical aspect, at least in our experience, is that at the beginning of a workshop, we do not always know to 100% which scenario and which level of detail we need. So we could start out with something like, yeah, let's travel from A to B, and let's look at the standard case, at the 80% case. And then we arrive at a concrete example for that. Let's say travel from Hamburg to Amsterdam. And for those of you who are not familiar with the German railway system, actually, I looked up this connection earlier today because I will go into Amsterdam in June. There are two different types of trains that I need to take, Intercity Express and Intercity, and I need to change in Oldenburg. So we could do a concrete example where I and Henning buy two tickets, but also with seat reservations. We want to sit next to each other because we want to chat during the the train ride and the travel from Hamburg to Amsterdam and back, and so on and so on. So this is the difficult part. How do we choose good scenarios, useful scenarios that provide us with a lot of useful information, and which scenarios are not important for our goal? Or which ones are the ones that we need to do right now, and which ones we can do maybe in half a year later or in a year later. Scenario-based modeling is not a good, I'll rephrase it. Scenario-based modeling is a great idea to learn about the domain and to have concrete examples that you can actually implement and test. But it's a lot of effort if your goal is to have a complete model of all the possible scenarios. So the idea is that, like you can see on this map on the right, if you were to take a vacation in Europe and you want to see the most of Europe in, I don't know, in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, you will plan your travel accordingly and say, okay, I want to start off in Portugal and I want to see Paris and maybe Belgium and Berlin and Krakow and so on. So you put together your itinerary and you will get a nice overview of European landscape, cities, culture, and so on, but it's impossible to pack everything into those 3 or 4 weeks. So if you take this itinerary, you will miss the Alps, you will miss the Mediterranean, and so on. So it's typical that you need several scenarios, several stories to really cover a domain. So, and I'm not sure if, but at least Kenny is familiar with example mapping, one of those collaborative modeling techniques. And this is actually something that we use a lot in combination with domain storytelling when we ask what else could happen. So those little notes down here, they actually, well, they're not quite example mapping yet, but they could be a first step towards that. So what else could happen? The one where we have this discount card, or the one where, I don't know, the train is canceled and you need to get a refund, or the one where so from this wealth of possible stories, we need to find the ones that are right and important for our goal. And I hope we can discuss this a little bit later, how do you deal with that, how you could deal with that in event storming and other techniques. Now, the other aspect that we wanted to talk about is what we call the scope of a story, the scope of a scenario, and that consists of several factors. And now we will also say why Henning said, let's look at the old pen and paper days. So one scope factor that we've already talked about a bit is the granularity of a domain story or of a scenario in general. So we can have a very coarse-grained overview, very high summary, or we can take a deep dive and look at all the details. So the further up we are, the scenario is more about what happens, why does it happen, and the more detailed we go, it's more about how exactly does it happen. And sometimes we use a little metaphor that we borrowed from Alistair Cockburn in this book about use cases. He introduced these little symbols and called those cloud level, kite level, sea level, and fish level. And we found this very illustrative. And sometimes in workshops, we discuss this with our participants and say, well, should we stay on cloud level here or should we go deeper? So this is very useful as a tool for facilitators to align the level of detail, because otherwise you will have models that are very coarse-grained in one area and very detailed in another area, and somehow this is a kind of bad smell, doesn't work very well. Now, another factor that determines the scope of a scenario is the point in time. Are we looking at a scenario as is? Are we analyzing a current process, a current situation? Or do we want to design a new, hopefully improved process, maybe with some new piece of software? And this is also something that as moderators or facilitators, we try to clarify that at the beginning of a workshop, or maybe even as a preparation step. What do we need in terms of granularity, in terms of point in time? It can be very confusing if we have a group of people and one of them is modeling an as-is situation, another one has a to-be situation in mind. And even if we discuss a to-be situation, one might have the vision of, let's say, this is my software product in 3 years' time, my grand vision. And another person says, well, okay, for the next release in 3 months, this is what I want to model. And if you have those different perspectives in the same workshop, the resulting picture will, or the resulting perspectives, they will not align. It will not create a consistent picture. So that is also something that we like to clarify. And the final factor is what we call purity of the domain. Do we want to look at a process or a scenario that involves software systems and how they work and how they are used? Or is it better to look at the process in a sort of idealized, pure way? Now, this is probably the thing that we struggled the most with, to find the good words for that when writing the book. Henning said, well, let's look at the pen and paper days. This is often a little trick to get people to talk about the actual things, the actual domain terms that we want to find in those workshops. Because what happens a lot when we talk about software-supported processes is that people are so used to badly implemented systems, to tainted domain language that is not based on the actual domain, that it's based on some software system that doesn't really fit to the domain, that they kind of lose or have lost their domain language. So the most extreme example that I've ever experienced of that was actually during an event storming session where people did not write domain events on the orange sticky notes. They wrote things like, it was a host system, so they had this screens that they worked with, and the terms that they used were, I filled out screen J17, and then I filled out screen G74. This was a big problem because it didn't tell us anything about the business process. So we took a step back and said, okay, let's find out the pure process that exists somehow behind this badly implemented host system. So this is something that we can kind of gently force people to do when we say, okay, we will not model software systems here. We are looking for the pure process. How does it work conceptually? And then later on, we will decide how we will put this into software. So, and this was something that we, as I said before, struggled a little bit, finding the right terms and distilling our experience into actionable advice. So this is what we came up with, and what we do before workshops. We actually do it before event storming as well as domain storytelling in other workshops. We try to find out which granularity should the model or the models be. What point in time are we looking at? Are we analyzing? Are we designing? And do we need to look at a pure process or digitalized process? And then which scenarios do we need to cover the domain or to reach the goal that we have? And that is what we've prepared so far. And now it's time to open the mics again.
Yeah. I think David wrote an interesting and typical thing in the chat. David, you wrote, I led my first event storming with developers, and we got stuck very quickly on implementation detail of login. That's a typical thing with not only event storming, but generally collaborative modeling, that we focus on the technical stuff. That's also why I started with this, let's make this thought experiment being on the pen and paper days. That's not something that's special to domain stories. That's also can also be true for event storming as well, of course. And I think an important detail that you write is that you say, I led my first event storming with developers. And when we have developers and only developers in such a session, they will talk about what they know. And that's, of course, developing software and tech stuff. And so the most important thing with all COMO, all collaborative modeling methods is always to get the right people, to get real access to people that understand the business. And we could see that, honestly, we could see that in the story that we modeled today, again. So if you, Stefan, if you can jump to the demo session, we can see here, there's the traveler in the middle of this picture, like the spider in the net. And the other guys that are there, well, there's one arrow or two arrows pointing to them, because that's the interaction that the traveler has with them. And the reason for this is that we only had experts in being a traveler in this session here. We all are experts in being a traveler, but none of us is being an expert in being a clerk or being an engineer or machine. And this is typically a sign that we forgot to invite somebody when we see a picture like this, where we only have the traveler here and we want to do something coarse-grained. When we want to do something fine-grained, then it might be okay that we only have a session with one person, but these big picture coarse-grained things, well, there's typically, it becomes apparent that we would have invited a conductor, an engineer, and a ticket agent to the session as well to get the whole story. Okay, but I didn't want to stop the discussion with it, but only to start.
Yeah, so there's a few things on that, because for me, I run into the same problem, right, with digital and, but sometimes well, today I did it with only backenders, but they were perfectly able to explain to me, this is what the domain experts are saying, right? And sometimes I even want to start there, because if there's not a collaborative culture, I want to slowly massage it in, but get them out of, that's always the hard part, get them out of the technical language. We went perfect here, but sometimes they don't know, right? So that's the hard part, but I'm not sure that the digital one versus the olden days. Well, I think that's valid on one way. I sometimes struggle because also they are still using digital things, right? So there's a negotiation going on there. What are we modeling and whatnot? So I try to put for myself, depending on it, I try to capture it in front, but I also try to capture it during such a session. I'm not sure if that's different for you. This negotiation on granularity. You want to have some sort of granularity, but the real granularity I try to capture within one session. Is that different for you?
I like to, when I go into a session as a facilitator, I feel better if I have a plan. Like, okay, this is the granularity that we're aiming for. We discussed it before with the people who initiated the workshop. But then I'm always ready to change the plan because, as we know, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So, yeah, it's often it turns out during the workshop that, okay, this is too coarse-grained, it's not helpful, or this is too fine-grained. We need to go up a level. So it happens. But usually, I feel better if we talked about this before the workshop, and I actually make it usually one of the first points before we, during the workshop, before we actually start modeling. We say, okay, this is what I understood is helpful for you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are we on the same page here? Do we have the same expectations?
Yeah, so you recheck it during at the start, right? Yeah.
And I also do that for event storming sessions, for example. So we say, well, are we analyzing the as-is process, or are we designing a new process? Or, where's the start of the process? Where's the end? So are we modeling something like, let's say, sticking with this train example, is the last event on the board, is it train arrived in Amsterdam, or is it traveler disembarked the train? And is the first event, I need to go to Amsterdam, it's not an event, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, so usually what I then do is, well, do the same, right? What's the scenario? And then just let them ditch out all the events they can think of there without discussing it. And then make the negotiation, what's the start and what's the end? Is that so? I was wondering, would you do similar? So with event storming, you could do, everyone does their own event, while you could also do the step by step. Would you have something similar in domain storytelling?
Sometimes we change the first or a couple of first events. So what typically happens is that we add assumptions or preconditions. So Henning, beneath the caption, he wrote standard case. So usually, what is the standard case? This will be elaborated during the session. So maybe a standard case is national travel, no reservation, whatever, and then we can maybe even skip, let's say, the first step, asking for the options. Well, this is not the standard case. Usually, you know where to go and so on.
Yeah, I really like that, because this is what David said about the login flow, right? If I sometimes just say, no, we're not doing that. People are either logged in or you don't need to log in, put that right in that case scenario. Yeah. I think that's very important to do that.
Yeah, let's assume the customer is logged in. What will happen next? And then we get over this point of, well, you spend half of the workshop discussing the login process, even though it's not what you actually want, what you need to learn.
I'm curious how others in the meetup here see the similar things, right? Especially developers are really, I'm a developer, call myself a developer, are really nice in all the edge cases, right? If then. So not sure how other people experience this. They experience the same.
I was wondering about a different subject a bit, like how do you deal with different entry points? Because now we started with the traveler and that became the focal point for the model. But what about if we started, for instance, with the train and modeled from there? So like start with the train that needs to go from A to B, and then we get signals and rail security systems and a more engineering focused view, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, we when you look at the arrows, most of them come out of the traveler because he feels like he's the one who's active. So there's step number 6. That's conductor checks ticket of traveler. Even for that, if we only have the traveler, it often happens that the traveler says, well, I show my ticket to the conductor. And then the conductor checks it. So when we have both of them, the traveler and the conductor, or the engineer, who has a more deeper look on the train here, then we will typically get in a discussion about this stuff too. So, for example, the traveler buys the ticket from the ticket agent, but the ticket agent could also say, I sell the ticket to the traveler. And of course, both views are right. And that's something that we don't have to agree on, but it's important to make these points visible and also see when we later go on designing a system from that, what is the system going to do? Is the system going to enable the traveler to buy a ticket? So is the traveler then buying the ticket from the ticket agent? Stefan, maybe you can turn on the cursors from other people, then I might show. So yeah, now you can see my cursor here. Thank you. So is the traveler buying the ticket then from the system, and we add a new actor here, system, or is the traveler buying the ticket from the ticket agent, and the ticket agent is using a system behind that? Both are, of course, valid systems to build. And we, when we are in an analysis phase, like we are here, then of course we want to find that out. Are we going to take the work away from the ticket agent and they are automated away? Or are we going to build a system to support the work of the ticket agent? So that's often interesting here. Yeah.
So do you then just like start the map over but with a different focal point, or just keep it as is and try to append the current map?
So both ways can work. And I think that's also a matter of personal taste. So I would ideally want to have both people in the same room and have that discussion and agree on one story. If that's not possible, then it might be a good idea to have the story told from the engineer, with a focal point on the engineer and what they are doing, and another story from the viewpoint of the traveler, and see what they are doing. But having said that, having these two focal points is interesting. As it's collaborative modeling, it's about working together. It's not only about working together between domain experts and developers. It's about working together between domain expert A and domain expert B and domain expert C as well.
It would be nice to mix her up, right? If you got someone from the ticket purchase and someone from the ticket check, you have developers and domain experts, and you split these two bounded contact. If let's say there are two teams, ticket purchase and ticket check, they're two separate teams. You split both teams up, combine them, and then both let them model one of the same scenario and see if they match or not. It gives great insights, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It does. And it's also a matter of the granularity that you are on. On a coarse-grained level, you usually want to have many people because you want to get a common picture. If you are on a fine-grained level, if you are on this fish level or sea level, then it might be okay to talk only to a few people because we are looking at all the details, and all the details for the ticket purchase, where they might not be interesting for the conductor or the engineer. But the conductor, of course, he wants to know that a ticket is sold in the first place, so they can do the job.
What do you mean with many? I'm a DDDer, right? So I want to know what you mean.
Oh my God,
many.
No, you don't. You know, you are a DDDer, I'm a consultant, so my answer is, of course, it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends on the domain, and I would say many is typically a number between 1 or 2 handfuls of people. So when you have more people, then the process is typically so big that you can't bring that all into one thing. If all these people are different experts in different parts of the domain. David, you've written a text in the chat. Maybe you want to open up your mic and put it on the sound.
The scenarios that come out of domain storytelling are not necessarily actionable by developers directly in implementing the system, because there's lots of additional details, branch points, cases. There are too many cases to create a scenario for every one. So developing the business model that has the branches and actually combines many scenarios into one model seems more actionable by the developers. So I was wondering if there was anything, any thoughts people had on organizing ways to make that process of developing the domain model for many scenarios have support or tooling or something other than just ad hoc, some architect or team lead or somebody just does it.
Yeah. Stefan,
Yeah.
if you like, or else I would say something.
I'm not sure if I understood everything that was part of the question, but correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misinterpreting your question. So there are a couple of things that go through my head right now, because I'm actually consulting with a client now that what we do is together with the CEOs, we develop, we model domain stories that visualize their idea for a new business model. So they have an idea for business model in mind, and now we got together a couple of architects and product owners, and together we try to make coherent stories out of their vision, and that works pretty well. And it's.
Are the stories capturing one scenario each?
Yeah.
So at some point, the system is implementing a business model that is a collection or an aggregate of stories or scenarios, plus everything else that derives from the various branch points that aren't covered by scenarios.
Yeah.
And so if you were to reverse engineer a finished system, you would get this business model that looks like a gobbledygook spaghetti network diagram.
Yeah.
And I once did some work to try and make that more tame. So I was just wondering if there was anything.
Yeah.
You know, I came to this group like a year or so ago. I'm learning that people have already filled in a lot of the gaps I wished were filled in. And there's lean pubs in progress, and people are actually doing these things and evolving them in practice, like event storming. And so I don't want to just jump in and try and fill in a gap that's already been filled by other people.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if there was anything in that area you just described is now being done kind of on an ad hoc basis. If there's any work for visual techniques or transformations or ways of representing the business model that helps move away from those network diagrams that are incomprehensible.
Yeah, so I would say there is some things that we can do. So first, the story that we looked at is on a coarse-grained level, and when we want to derive a business model, a domain model in classes and methods, in the end, then we need a more fine-grained model here. And having said that, what we always have to keep in mind, all this collaborative modeling stuff, that's awesome. Stefan, I would say we love it. We use it every day, but we must not forget that this is no end in itself. It's only a means to an end. The end is we want to have running software in production helping people. Or the real end is we want people in the business can do their work in a better way. That's what we want to do. When we can achieve that with software, great. When we can build that software with domain stories, awesome. But when we are drawing domain stories, when we're storming, event storming, when we're building an example map, this feels like, well, we're doing this only for itself. This is la pour la. Then we have to stop it. That's important to see, because that means we never want to achieve a complete view of everything that's possibly happening. That's something else that we have in software. In software, we have to be aware of many different cases, and the software has to deal with many different cases that we probably do not want to model in either any of the collaborative modeling techniques. And having said that, when we have looked at a reasonable number of different, different cases, then it might be interesting to derive a domain model from that. And here I've put some sticky notes here. It's not so easy with this coarse-grained view here. I tried anyway. It would be better with a more fine-grained thing. For example, I would say in the context ticket check that we can see here, there would be derived from this thing here, this work object ticket, there would of course be a class ticket. That would be probably an entity when we're doing object-oriented modeling, of course, as an assumption. And then we can see here, well, there is this activity that the conductor does checks the ticket. So we might want to add a method here that is called check. And that's a first start for a domain model. Of course, we would have to go into the details deeper to see how a check like this is done. But let's look at what we have here on the right. We have the ticket purchase, the other bounded context, and we have again a ticket here. And we might want to build another model of the ticket here. So another class that's called ticket. And what we are doing here in step 2, we are buying a ticket. So maybe we want to have a method buy here. And what we can see here is this having several models, not having the one big ticket model, but separating it in 2 or in several models here as well. Of course, check and buy, they are very big here. We would want to have them smaller.
To go a bit into that, on the right side, you probably have a reservation with multiple tickets because you have maybe multiple trains. So a ticket represents one ticket on the left side. Yeah,
yeah, interesting.
So what I usually do after this, or after maybe I'll do some example mapping, I use the bounded context canvas as a non-representation in time, but a representation of the bounded context, right? With what are my inputs and what are my outputs of it. Still not a model like you just did, Henning, which is also valuable. We need that. But that helps you, David, is usually I go to that bounded context canvas. What's my input? What's my output? Where it's coming from? What are my rules, etc. To give you a more, a less, well, storytelling flow, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
There's a very good point. There are at least 2 approaches that come to my mind that provide this sort of structure. So at some point, I totally agree with you, Kenny, you need to move from scenarios or behavior dynamic diagrams into something that provides structure. There's bounded context canvas as one of those tools or methods. And another one is a user story map that kind of combines this process backbone with a structure for more detailed scenarios. So what I do often is after a couple of domain stories that play within bounded context, we create at least coarse-grained requirements out of that and turn it into a user story map. And that will be the home for requirements that come out of or derived from different domain stories. And not just domain stories, also other things like sample mapping. So all these hints like this variant lookup timetable or climate ticket and so on, they could then become requirements in a user story map, for example. So not everything has to be spelled out in a scenario kind of format. But if you know the main business process behind it, if you can derive the business process, then you can transform it into an alternate model and continue with that. Yeah. I'm not sure if that makes sense to everyone. I guess you need to have seen a user story map before that, or maybe tried some example mapping to make sense of that all.
Yeah. So one thing, talking about this user story mapping thing, or user stories in general, is that the most fun of all of these tools you get when you combine them. So, for example, what you can see here in this domain story is who does what, with whom. You can see that easily in a story here. But what we can't see is why they do it. Sometimes it's hidden in the notes, sometimes it's not. So it's often a good idea to move on to user stories with it. For example, to look at step 1 and make a user story, ask for options, ask for traveling options, and a story number, or a user story out of this step number 2, which is called by ticket. Maybe I do that here on the board as well. So this is ask for options, and maybe this is better here. And then step number 2 would be, or user story number 2 is by ticket. And step number 3 would maybe be board train, or maybe we see, well, boarding a train is not something that happens in the system. That's something that happens in real life. So this does not become a user story because the domain person traveler is a user here, but is just a domain person there. There's no system to be used. Maybe then we don't turn it into a user story. And then the next step is, I don't know, drive train or whatever. And then we can see this is the backbone for our user story map. And then next is, okay, ask for options by, let's look at this, by, we can then say, as a traveler, oh my God, I can't when you're looking, as a traveler, I want to buy a ticket. That's all information that we get from the domain story here. As a traveler, I want to buy a ticket. And now this so that part that we often have in user stories, that's not in the domain story. So this is again a situation where we want to go back to our domain experts and ask them. So a user story is often said, it's often said that a user story is a promise for a conversation, and that's a domain story too. That's what's happening here. We have this conversation then. We go to the traveler and ask them, well, I know you want to buy a ticket, but why do you do it? And then you can enter here whatever the reason is. So, which can of course be different things here, because I want to come from Hamburg to Amsterdam, but maybe it's also because I want to go on holiday and want to do some recreation, and that will help us build the system later as well. So coming back to what I said earlier, the important part is it's not enough to just have a hammer in your toolbox. You need several tools, and you need to combine those tools. Then you are doing, and then you can build something great. And if you have only one of them, yeah, well.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you want to eventually get the motivations or the whys. And so far, I haven't seen a diagramming technique or other technique that couples those together and what relationships exist between the motivations or goals people have and then what you build to support those. And if there's breaks down into subtasks or subdomains, those kind of inherit and take and help implement some portion of the parent goal or motivation. Seems like there's some relationships there that can be done diagrammatically that you can then go back to the domain experts and say, did I get this right?
I guess impact mapping would be the closest candidate. But then, at least in the way that I've been using it, I did it more like on a more strategic level before I go down to the details. I haven't really connected it to, let's say, implementable requirements or something like that. So, and also didn't connect it in a diagrammatic way. Could be interesting to explore that.
Yeah, for me, that would be example mapping, where you collaboratively design the requirements, right? in a way saying, okay, this is the business rule. For instance, in this case, a ticket, right? In the right side, buying a ticket, a very simple one, because I model a cinematic domain. For my examples would be, you can only have one ticket per seat available, right? So you could create scenarios around that. Then you can say, okay, how many people can sit next to each other? So these are all business rules concerning in that bounded context. So first you design the bounded context as well, we did here. And then you can find, okay, which concepts or which rules fit in this bounded context, right? So for instance, one ticket per seat, for instance, but maybe because this is reservations, perhaps, right? We overbook sometimes, right? So that's why one ticket per seat is a very valid rule there. And then you can create a scenario, right? So, well, this is a simple one. Given there's 2 seats available, then you can only give that seats out, right? But if it gets more complex, you can model these scenarios as well with example mapping very well. And these example mapping, you can map directly on your domain model and well, create automated tests from them. And then you can recheck with the, well, domain expert, these are our results and these are our tests, this is what you mean. Which with these example maps and with now the stories that you created here validates if your domain model does what it is supposed to do. That's how I would do it, but I would use the bounded context canvas together with example mapping to after one of these storyline collaborative modeling sessions. So that's how I would implement, but this is the thing with the collaborative modeling, it's design, which is chaotic, which you need to find sweet spots and switch from collaborative modeling techniques, and then at some point diverge after, or converge after diverging. And I tend to not optimize for converging too soon. I'll just try different scenarios with different collaborative modeling techniques and then converge and find different models. But yeah, that's mine. And I saw Henning and Stefan, I think, nodding.
I've been trying to do some impromptu example mapping. I'm not sure if you would agree, Kenny, with what I've written down. But my goal was, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with the technique, to actually model the example that you gave. So for this requirement or story here, there's a business rule, or at least one that we, potential business rule, 1 ticket per seat, that could make things easier. And then Kenny says, well, I want to buy 2 tickets that I want to sit next to each other. Is that a valid example for this business rule? Does it bring up new questions, concerns, or does it fit to that model?
Yeah.
What about this overbooking?
Yeah, you can go deeper, I guess, in this case, since you're booking 2 trains, because if you come from Hamburg, you need 2 trains. So I need to make sure that there's availability in both trains. So I would guess a business rule is there needs to be availability in both trains. Well, right, then you go into the specific scenarios a bit deeper.
Yeah.
Which is another. Okay. So I hope that answers all the, well, your question. Does anyone else have any questions in the meantime? It's a really nice question so far, I think. Not sure what you think. No?
Have you checked the YouTube channel for questions?
Yeah, no, not at the moment, but maybe, well, I have one final question. And this is something I usually run up to, and I've got my own heuristics, but you say as is versus to be. We haven't explored that, but I'm always trying to be specific. We're doing the as is, but still people model the to be or want to go into the to be. It's a simple answer, but do you see that often? And when it happens a lot, what do you do? What's Well, how do you cope with that? People always wanted to go to the pretty little to be situation.
So I think one thing is you have to say it again, time and again. Well, we are modeling the as-is. Let's not go to the to be now. And I think an important point is to make clear that we are not going to stay with the as-is, and that we're going soon to the to be. And I think domain stories are well fitted for that, because one domain story usually doesn't take a long time to build a first picture, and we can build a good domain story in 20 or 30 minutes. And if people are itching with going on to the to be, then we can start with an as-is story, model that in half an hour, and then say, okay, and now let's take this same process and turn it into the to be version, and then we can see those versions beside each other. And that usually takes much longer than the half hour. From my experience, to be modeling is needs much more creativity, of course, and also much more time to come to a result. So when you do half an hour as is modeling, then it takes 1 hour or 1.5 hours to do the corresponding to be modeling. Plus, what's also important is what is to be. To be can mean different things, and usually we have different points in time. That's why we call it point in time here, because usually there are several points in time. One point in time is when the new system will be there. Another point in time is when the process is optimized. Now that we see the process on the wall, we usually see, well, this process is not good as it is. We have to change things. And another thing that always happens is the point in the future where the legal requirements are changing. So, for example, here in Europe, we had that when the SEPA was introduced. So that's the Single European Payment Area. So where all the European countries had the possibility to transfer money easily from one account to the other. Or another thing, what was the GDPR? That's the European regulations for what's the right English word? for data
privacy stuff.
And this, of course, happens all the times, especially when you're doing international business. Then every country decides on their own when they are doing this and that. So there's this different areas. That's what I want to say when we have this as is versus to be thing. So what is the to be that we are going to model? And the truth be told, this is also kind of true for the as is as well. So which as is it? Is it the as is now, or is it the as is from yesterday? They also might be interesting. And as a final word, maybe when we look at these scope factors, it's also important to look at the last line, which is small here, that the scope is a combination of these. And for different purposes, we need different combinations. So for example, if you want to find boundaries, then you want to be coarse-grained, pure as is. But when you want to implement a domain model, then you want to be fine-grained, pure, and maybe to be. Depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, I also want to have final words. Coming back to Kenny's question.
You always want to have the final word.
The next meetup, you can have the final word. Going back to Kenny's question, I think often the desire of participants to jump to the to-be process is because they have some solutions in mind for problems or pain points without actually talking about those problems or pain points. So there's usually a problem in disguise of a proposed solution, and domain experts proposing software solution is a problem on its own. because often those are not the best solutions that you can conceive. So what I do is, when this happens, a lot of time, if it's an event storming workshop, I introduce these pink sticky notes for the problems or green sticky notes for opportunities and say, okay, this looks like an opportunity that you brought up. Please use this color for that. If it's a domain storytelling workshop, we use these annotations to have kind of parking place for those ideas and then discuss them later. And maybe it is a solution, maybe it's not the best solution, but usually it's there's something behind it, and we need to uncover that original problem before we jump to conclusions.
Cool. Thanks. And with that, I think this will be the end of the meetup, or do you have anything important to add?
Yeah, I just remembered that there's of course, some advertisements. We're doing workshops online and in Amsterdam. That's why I looked up traveling to Amsterdam. The Miro board will be online, so we can click on it if interested. And of course, there's our little community ebook. Kenny and Joao are the editors, visual collaboration tools. And I think several of those techniques that we mentioned today are covered in this book. It's free unless you want to donate some money. There's always a good cause that at the end of the year receives the money collected from this little booklet here. Actually, it's not so small anymore. It's grown quite a bit. And if you want to contact Henning or us, there are our contact details. So feel free to ask questions whenever they come up. Thank you.
And thank you, Stefan and Henning. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening in, and for all your questions and interactions. Hope to see you next time, which will be at the end of March. We will announce it pretty soon, and see you next time. Bye-bye.